I didn't open that dam out of anger. I opened it out of love. Love for this land. Love for the creek that sang me to sleep as a boy. Love for the grandfather who once said, "Son, water talks, you just gotta listen." When I came home from war, I didn't expect to fight again. But when I saw what they did, 35 houses where our cattle used to graze, I knew I had no choice. This isn't a revenge story. It's a story about a soldier, a dam, and what happens when you steal the wrong man's water. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm 34 years old, a third-generation landowner, and when I came home from Afghanistan, everything had changed. Not just the skyline of Austin or the face in the mirror after 2 tours in a war zone, but the land. Our land. The land Pops raised me on was buried under tennis courts, cul-de-sacs, and McMansions wrapped in decorative vinyl siding. I didn't even react when they handed me the eviction notice. I just looked them in the eye and slid an old envelope across the table. A 1923 water rights deed signed in ink that had long outlasted the men who penned it. The man across the table, the HOA lawyer in his polished shoes and polyester smile, read the paper twice. His hand started shaking halfway through. He didn't know yet, but 35 homes were about to become lakefront property. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable video, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That way, you'll never miss any new coming videos like this. Now, let's get back to it. Pops always taught me that the land doesn't really belong to you. You belong to it. And for 47 acres outside Austin, that meant patchy mesquite pastures, a smile-shaped creek, and a little earth dam built in '78 with love, sweat, and Army Corps blueprints. He built that dam not for power, not for money, just to help the land hold water through the brutal Texas summers and trickle enough downstream to keep our neighbors' pastures green. He called it putting water back where God meant it to be. And for 45 years, the dam did exactly that. While I was over in Afghanistan rebuilding wells in dust-choked villages, Pops passed away. The land went into a trust. My sister Sarah, sweet, brilliant California Sarah, took over, and that's where the trouble started. She didn't know about water rights. She didn't know about Texas law. And more importantly, she didn't know who Maggie Thornwell was. By the time I made it home, Willowbrook Estates had already unfolded like a weed across my back 40. Months of construction had transformed the rolling pasture into a cookie-cutter development where every house looked like it had been designed by a tax accountant with Pinterest boards. I remember stepping out of my truck, boots hitting gravel still sticky with tire tracks from concrete haulers. At first, I thought I had the wrong place. Then I saw the old oak tree near the cattle gate, my initials still carved in the bark from when I was 9. The tree was still here, the land was still here, but everything else was wrong. A construction foreman in a neon vest spotted me. He waved like I was a curious neighbor. "You looking for someone?" he asked. I told him this was my grandfather's land. The look on his face shifted, something between confusion and a little fear. Then he said something I will never forget. "Far as I know, this land belongs to Willowbrook Estates now. Got all the permits to prove it." That man had no idea he just stepped on a battlefield. I called the county first. A board clerk told me that the land had been under adverse possession proceedings for months. Said the HOA had listed it as vacant, unused, and had applied for zoning adjustments citing community benefit. And during that whole time, I'd been 7,000 miles away getting mortared in Paktia province. That was my introduction to Maggie Thornwell, president of Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, queen of passive-aggressive warfare, wife of Councilman Rick Thornwell, the same man who'd pushed for expedited zoning reviews through the city planning board just before her HOA expanded into unused land. Her strategy was surgical. They filed for adverse possession, claimed the land was abandoned, showed fake maintenance logs that reported mowing and groundskeeping. Installed lights and utility stubs just across the fence line to make it seem like the land was part of the new development. Even had surveyors redraw parcel lines. And all the while, Sarah thought the taxes were being handled. To her credit, they were. The property management company she'd hired kept paying them, but they never flagged the change in zoning status. Never asked who gave permission to reclassify our cattle pasture as residential ready. Turns out, it doesn't take much to convince a planning commission full of golf buddies and real estate developers when your husband sits on the city council. Then the eviction notice came. Printed on thick paper like a wedding invite, it said I had 30 days to vacate what I'd spent my life defending. What Pops gave his last breath to protect. But the real heartbreaker wasn't the concrete, or the fences, or the for sale signs swinging under oak limbs that once shaded our herd. It was the water, or rather, what was missing. You see, the dam Pops built worked in harmony with the creek. The flow was subtle, almost polite. It filled the livestock tanks, quenched the garden rows, spilled gently past the gravel slipway and into the lower pasture. But now, it was bone dry. The little spillway that once sparkled under moonlight was cracked, dusty. The reeds were yellow. I followed the creek bed up past our fence line and almost didn't recognize what I saw. They'd laid black pipe, big, ugly 3-inch conduits that redirected the natural flow west, straight into the new subdivision. There, gleaming like artificial lakes, were 3 man-made ponds feeding decorative waterfalls and irrigation sprayers, engineered with stolen water. Water meant for crops, not koi fish. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just land theft, it was a resource extraction. They hadn't only taken soil and space, they'd taken lifeblood. Pops used to say, "You control the water, you control everything." Maggie Thornwell must have known it too. Every property brochure at Willowbrook Estates proudly proclaimed abundant natural water features and sustainable irrigation. Pictures of kids running through sprinklers, parents sipping wine beside sparkling ponds. All false. They were selling stolen flow under my family's name. When I confronted her the next day, she showed up at the edge of the property in her white golf cart, flanked by 2 HOA board members in matching polo shirts. She smiled like we were neighbors at a potluck. "You should have stayed close to home," she chirped. "The world moves fast these days." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Because I'd seen this kind of war before. And I knew exactly how to fight it. Maggie Thornwell was the kind of woman who weaponized a smile. Everything about her was deliberate, from the pearls on her neck right down to the white tennis shoes she wore to zoning meetings like she was headed to Sunday brunch. She was charm with claws, and the reality she created around her HOA was a kind of performance art. Perfect hedges, pristine driveways, and not a single front yard out of regulation. But behind that manicured curtain was something darker. You see, Maggie didn't just want control, she required it. She demanded it. And when someone stood in her way, someone like me, she didn't argue, she buried them in bureaucracy. The first letter arrived the week after our confrontation, a friendly reminder that my farmhouse porch violated city code revisions. 2 days later, a new notice. Suspected environmental hazards from an unlicensed agricultural sewage system. Same septic tank Pops installed in 1962, passed every inspection since. Then came the drive-bys. HOA board members in matching polos and clipboards drove past slowly, staring, taking photos, flipping pages like they were building a case. I wired trail cams to every tree line. Maggie's people called them visual obstructions and cited that in their next report to the county. It was systematic, calculated. Noise complaints followed. I started playing country music while doing fence repairs. Low volume, broad daylight. They reported it for disruptive behavior. A week later, code enforcement was at my gate saying there, "Deben anonymous concerns about distress signals," probably because I'd been testing copper piping in the pasture with a blinking surveyor beacon. And that was just the beginning. The real trouble started with Rick Thornwell, Maggie's husband and a sitting member of the city council. Convenient, isn't it? While she ran the HOA with a velvet hammer, he pushed zoning and utilities in her favor. Their collusion wasn't even subtle. Rick fast-tracked a zoning adjustment that reclassified my back 40 as high-density potential. That alone quadrupled the land value for them. Meanwhile, I was still running rain-catch calculations at the dam and watching the water level drop every day. That dam wasn't just storage. It was balance, built with Army Corps oversight to regulate flow during dry spells. Now, thanks to their plastic pipes and pumps rerouting the main creek, that delicate balance was collapsing. And when someone reroutes a creek in Texas, that's not just theft, that's environmental sabotage. I contacted the property manager my sister had hired. The guy sounded nervous just talking to me, said his contract had been reassigned for policy realignment. Whatever that meant. The new firm, Loan Land Services, I looked them up. Guess whose construction company was listed as a major client? Rick Thornwell, of course. It was a lockstep operation. That's when the wellness check happened. 2 county social workers showed up at 7:30 a.m. saying they'd received reports from Veteran Affairs about possible reintegration issues and concerns over my mental state. One of them read from a clipboard while glancing at the barn behind me. "You've been through a lot, Mr. Morrison. Sometimes returning veterans struggle in isolation." I invited them in, made coffee, sat at the table with Pops's journal open beside the 1923 water rights deed. Let them see exactly what they needed to order documentation purpose. They left, polite but tense. I watched from the porch as Maggie, still in her golf cart, smirked from the corner near my fence line. She thought she was winning. But here's the thing about fighting soldiers. You don't beat them by playing nice. You don't beat them by stacking paper and hoping they fold. Because I'd fought insurgents who buried IEDs in goat trails. I'd rebuilt wells in the middle of mortar fire. I'd negotiated river access with tribal elders through interpreters under threat of sniper cover. And this was just suburbia with better lighting. Maggie's campaign relied on fear, isolation, making me feel like the ground beneath my boots belonged to her now, that the dam was hers to decorate, the water hers to sell, and that I was just one more aging vet with PTSD and no allies. But in trying to box me in, she made one mistake. She thought I was alone. So I started building something bigger than a defense. I started building a case, water tests, maps, time-lapse videos, flow rate charts. I began quietly contacting the neighbors Maggie had pushed out over the years, farmers, gardeners, one man who'd lost a 3-generation pecan orchard to another one of Rick's zoning projects. They all had stories, all had papers they'd saved, photos, permits Maggie prayed had been forgotten. She wasn't expanding a neighborhood. She was building her empire on other people's stolen soil. And I just started digging. The thing about creeks is, they remember where they're supposed to go. You can pour concrete, lay pipes, dig channels, and build as many ponds as you like. But when the right storm hits, water will always try to find its way home. That's what haunted me every time I walked down to what used to be Pop's Dam. The water that once shimmered in the morning sun now barely coated the muddy bottom. Insects buzzed around dying cattails, and minnows had vanished from the shallow pools. The land was thirsty, angry. And so was I. I started walking the creek daily, documenting everything. Pulled soil samples, marked pipe installations, took photos of freshly dug trenches leading away from the original creek bed. You didn't have to be an engineer to see it. They weren't just stealing water. They were rerouting nature herself. I made a call to a friend, Tony Riggs, Army buddy turned EPA enforcement officer. Told him what I saw. He asked one question. Did they file a Section 404 permit for diverting the waterway? I asked him to repeat that. He did slowly. Turns out, if you interfere with natural water flow on federally recognized waters in the U.S., you need a permit under the Clean Water Act. And if your dam was built with Army Corps guidance, your entire watershed falls under federal jurisdiction. Federal, not local. I knew Pop S. had worked with the Corps back in '78, but I didn't have any of the paperwork. At least, not yet. So I started digging the old-fashioned way. Courthouse records, county archives. I spent hours paging through dusty folders, old maps, blurry microfilm. 5 hours in, I found it. A dam permit, Army Corps of Engineers letterhead. Initialed, stamped, filed. And there it was in black and white, for flood control and agricultural water retention in the Willow Creek subwatershed. Federal Project IDTX 2897WC. My heart pounded as I sat at that courthouse desk. If Maggie had diverted the water and destroyed Army Corps infrastructure without a single federal filing, she hadn't just broken local regulations. She'd broken federal law. But fate wasn't done with me yet. Because 3 drawers down in the Water Rights Archive, I found something older, faded, fragile. A 1923 water rights deed issued to my great-grandfather, Daniel Morrison. Senior water rights to Willow Creek. Dated, notarized, and still enforceable under Texas law. Older than the subdivision. Older than the city council. Older than any real estate developer with a drone and a dream. See, in Texas, water rights are king. They're older than oil, tougher than mineral claims, and when they're senior, everyone else waits in line. And those rights don't expire because your land goes unoccupied. You still own the flow, no matter how many custom homes Maggie builds on stolen dirt pretending it's hers. That night, I stood at the dam gate, holding those photocopies in my hands with the August wind brushing against my shirt. Maggie wasn't just trespassing. She was stealing federally protected water, selling it through HOA brochures like it was community property, and violating more environmental regulations than she could spell. A few mornings later, I turned on the local news. There she was, standing next to one of her precious man-made ponds, crocodile tears in her eyes. "We're deeply concerned about that dam," she told the reporter. "It's old, dangerous, unsafe for our children down here. What if it breaks?" They aired B-roll of my property. The dam, the pasture, even a long, zoomed-in shot of me in the field like I was some criminal lurking in the bushes. Her words were a setup. They weren't worried about safety. They were building a case, painting me as unstable, dangerous. A rogue veteran with engineering skills and a grudge. They knew federal eyes were coming, and Maggie was already shaping the narrative. I knew how this game played out. You discredit the operator, question his sanity, and try to block him legally before he proves you wrong. But Maggie had forgotten something important. I wasn't just a veteran. I was an Army Corps engineer. And I'd spent years in the most chaotic war zones on Earth figuring out how to manage the one resource people die over: water. And for the first time in my life, that war had followed me home. This wasn't about bad neighbors anymore. This was environmental warfare, wrapped in HOA logos and real estate brochures. And they had no idea what was coming. By the end of September, my boots had walked every square inch of Pop's land twice over. I knew the flow of that creek like the back of my hand, when it whispered through brush, when it surged in rain. And I could feel how wrong it was now, like something was choking it from upstream. But like any battlefield, you don't go in without intel, so I dug in. First thing I did was start documenting everything. I installed trail cameras across the property. Motion-activated, night vision enabled, 3 along the fence line, 2 at the spillway. 1 camouflaged in a cedar tree pointed straight at the creek diversion Maggie's contractors had laid, everything time-stamped, everything archived. Every time a crew entered my land, or dumped fill dirt near the waterway, I logged it. And then I got organized. I charted water levels daily, marked sediment deposits in the dry parts of the original creek, measured flow velocity at all diversion points. See, water doesn't lie, and neither do numbers. The data built a story. And that story said one thing clearly: someone upstream had cut the artery to everything downstream. Maggie probably thought I'd lawyer up and burn through savings, that I'd get tired, back down, maybe take a settlement, but I wasn't looking for compensation. I was looking for someone to get wet. That's when I started making phone calls. I reached out to folks Maggie thought she'd buried, people she used to push around before she set her sights on my land. First call was Miguel Santos. His farm sat 2 properties south of mine, just downstream from the old creek. "You don't remember me," I told him, "but your uncle gave me my first hunting knife when I was 12. He was quiet for a moment. "I remember you, Jake Morrison, the kid from the Red Barn," he said, voice cracking. "My uncle used to say your pops was the only neighbor who watered downhill." When I told him what was happening with the creek, he didn't even let me finish. "She dried us out," Miguel said. "Land has been dying ever since. We lost half our corn last season. My dad swears he hears the creek at night, in his sleep." Next was Mrs. Chen. Still lived in the house she grew up in. Her vegetable garden had been thriving since the 1940s, until Willowbrook Estates' beautification project diverted half the seasonal runoff. Her cabbages went first. Tomatoes yellowed next. When she saw the old water rights deed I found at the courthouse, she stared at it like scripture. "My father kept buckets by the windowsill to collect every drop," she whispered, tracing the signature on the page with a wrinkled finger. "He would be proud of you." She offered her land as a staging site for equipment and public observation the day I executed the spillway plan. Didn't even hesitate. Farmers, neighbors, environmental experts. Piece by piece, Maggie's wall of silence started to crack. We weren't just angry landowners anymore. We were a coalition. Survivors of her expansion plan, each of us with a personal dam she'd tried to dry out. Through online forums, I discovered even more cases. 5 families who'd been pushed out of their property using the same method. Zoning changes, adverse possession, and sweetheart construction deals handed to Rick Thornwell's company. It wasn't a coincidence. It was policy, executed behind closed doors and presented with white teeth and HOA newsletters. And with Amanda Cross, a pro bono water rights attorney I found through a veterans legal support network, I started putting our evidence together into a federal case. She looked through what I gathered: photos, charts, water right records, permit voids, environmental damage. "Jake," she said, setting her glasses on the table, "this isn't just negligence. This is organized fraud." We weren't fighting over creek beds now. We were chasing a criminal conspiracy. Maggie, bless her pearls and passive aggression, didn't know it yet, but she'd built her private paradise on top of a ticking legal time bomb. Because while she was calling code enforcement for noise complaints, I was filing an environmental violation report with the EPA. While she whispered to county officials about my instability, I had a certified hydrologist confirming that Willow Creek's diversion violated Texas environmental management codes. And while she was planning her next HOA picnic, I was standing at the spillway with a wrench in one hand, Pop's journal under the other, and the dam gates ready, waiting for the right moment. The dam wasn't dangerous. It was waiting. And now, so was I. The night before I opened the dam, the sky turned the color of old bruises, dark purple, rolling gray clouds creeping in from the west like ghosts with unfinished business. It was perfect. The forecast said rain by morning. Not a flash flood, not a storm to panic the town, just steady, hard Texas rain. The kind Pop used to say woke the earth up from its sleep. I stood at the edge of the dam, water still as glass, the air thick with anticipation. And I knew, tomorrow, the water would flow again. But this wasn't about weather. It was about timing. Amanda had filed emergency motions, federal, environmental, agricultural. Every legal document was in place. The spillway wasn't an act of aggression. It was a return to intent. The 1978 dam permit required seasonal releases to preserve downstream agricultural health. And thanks to Pop's journals, we had 40 years of recorded precedent proving that. Tony called that night, told me the EPA was en route, said they'd arrive by 8:00 a.m. for a surprise inspection. "You've got one shot to show them," he said. "Make it count." I barely slept. At 4:30 a.m., I was already up in the control shed, replacing the last hydraulic valve manually, checking seals, recalibrating pressure regulators, verifying spillway channels. Every gate tested, every backup secured, every bolt tightened. Because this wasn't revenge. It was engineering. And when that knowledge is precise, when every decimal and drop matches the truth, you don't rage, you act. At 5:00 a.m., Mrs. Chen showed up with a thermos of oolong and her grandson trailing behind, carrying signs that read, "Save the Creek." Miguel Santos arrived next, with 2 trucks full of farmers who'd waded through 5 years of dust and dead soil. He brought his grandfather's journal. It had sketches, hand-drawn irrigation maps tracing the exact path Willow Creek used to take before Maggie's HOA got creative with land improvements. By sunrise, a small crowd had gathered along the pasture fence. No shouting, no slogans, just quiet people who'd lost something, now standing together ready to take it back. Amanda stood beside me, legal filings spread across the hood of her car. Press lanyard around her neck, voice recorder clipped to the collar of her jacket. Not just a lawyer today, she was documentation, witness, shield. At 6:47 a.m., the city's emergency motion to block the release officially failed. Denied by a judge who, turns out, wasn't on Rick's campaign donor list. Imagine that. That means I had exactly 73 minutes before Maggie's next stunt tried to shut me down again. She'd already sent in private security the night before, trying to jam the controls. My trail cams recorded everything. One guy used a full bag of concrete mix, tried to pour it into the hydraulic valve casing. He was arrested 10 minutes later by the sheriff, who'd finally had enough of Maggie Thornwell's nonsense. Turns out Texans don't like it when real farmers get bullied by people driving golf carts and wielding bylaws like blunt objects. The breeze shifted. Rain in the air. My hand settled on the master valve. Tony's voice echoed in my mind. "You're not breaking anything, you're restoring it." Pop's last journal entry sat open in my back pocket, dated right after a 1980 drought. Opened spillway to help the land heal. Let the water remind folks what kindness looks like. It wasn't flooding I was preparing for. It was a memory. At 7:02 a.m., with Amanda filming and EPA agents walking up the hill, I turned the main valve and held my breath. The hiss came first, then the groan of old metal finding purpose. And then the sound I'd waited 18 months to hear, the rush. The beautiful, ancient power of water moving downhill a little faster than gravity, a little slower than fury. From behind the dam, a ribbon of silver surged over the spillway rocks, snaked along its historical path, cutting through cracked earth like it was reclaiming what it had always known. No flood, no destruction. Just water, returning home. Miguel knelt beside the reformed creek bed, dipped his hand in, and whispered a prayer in Spanish. Mrs. Chen cried. And Maggie. She showed up 12 minutes later in a BMW, screaming at the EPA agents about property values and community safety. But by then, the creek had spoken, And the law was already listening. It didn't take long for the sound of water to draw a crowd. Within 20 minutes of the first rush over the spillway, the media showed up. A local news chopper hovered high above the dam, its blades like the ticking hands of a clock counting down Maggie Thornwell's empire. Reporters gathered near Mrs. Chen's property, where farmers were setting up a tent to serve coffee and explain the history of Willow Creek to anyone who showed up with a camera or microphone. For the first time in months, people were listening to the right story. Not a disturbed veteran threatening suburbia. Not a dangerous dam or unstable recluse. Just a community, forgotten, stolen from, and now fighting back. EPA agent Sarah Kim walked the length of the newly flowing creek with her boots in the mud, eyes on the banks, taking notes silently. 5 minutes after arriving, she turned to Amanda and said 6 words I'll never forget. "It's flowing exactly where it should be." That was our confirmation, our validation. This wasn't an act of destruction, it was an act of restoration. But Maggie didn't see it that way. She showed up in full suburban battle dress, navy blazer, pearls perfectly arranged, her HOA board members flanking her with clipboards and brochures about community impact. She marched straight toward the dam, red-faced and camera-ready, demanding that the federal agents shut the project down. "There are families downstream," she yelled. "This man is manipulating water to threaten lives." EPA agent Kim barely blinked. "Ma'am, this dam and creek meet federal criteria for regulated agricultural flooding, and the release today was legally compliant." She held up a folder with Amanda's filings. "We have authority here." Maggie didn't know what to do with that. You could see it on her face. This wasn't her county clerk or her city council puppet. These were real federal officers, and they weren't interested in HOA talking points. But she didn't back down. Instead, she entered full performance mode. Right there on camera, she staged her big breakdown, clutching her chest, gesturing to the water, claiming legal violations, fake injuries, psychological harassment. She waved at reporters. "He came back from war with revenge in his heart," she sobbed. "This is domestic environmental terrorism." The reporter from Channel 7 blinked and asked, "Ma'am, are you aware that this creek historically flowed through your property before your development altered it?" Maggie blinked like a deer in headlights. That moment captured on live TV was the crack in the dam of her narrative. Her voice faltered, her poise wobbled. And then Miguel stepped in. He held up a laminated aerial photo taken in 1999. The creek winding naturally through all their land, decades before Earth Movers, Inc., laid a single slab of concrete. "This pond you're worried about, it used to be our irrigation channel," he said calmly. "This isn't danger, this is memory." They aired that quote 3 times in the next 24 hours. And with every repeat, the ground shifted. By noon, Let the Creek Flow was trending locally. People from nearby neighborhoods drove out just to watch the water flow again. Mrs. Chen handed out cucumber sandwiches and told any reporter who asked, "Jake's just doing what his grandfather taught him. Protect the water, share the flow." Even people from inside Willowbrook Estates started to come around. Young parents new to town asking quiet questions. Was this really diverted water? Did the HOA know? Were their insurance policies even valid if this violated federal law? Amanda handed them pamphlets, answers, legal contact sheets. While Maggie shrieked about safety, we handed out facts. While she built panic, we rebuilt the past. Tony called later that afternoon to confirm the inevitable. "We're moving forward," he said. "Federal prosecution files open next week. You've done more than enough." But I wasn't done. As night fell, I returned to the dam, quiet now, the rush having softened into a steady, peaceful trickle. I walked down the slope barefoot, letting the mud touch my skin the way it had when I was a kid. Back when Pop would check the water levels by flashlight, and I'd tag along carrying his thermos. The air smelled like cedar, clay, and redemption. I knelt, dipped my fingers into the flowing stream, and felt the certainty I hadn't felt in months. We didn't just reclaim stolen land. We reminded water where it was always meant to go. It took 6 months for the dust to settle, and for the water to truly clear. What began as one man opening a dam ended with an entire town watching justice flow like it should have all along. Maggie Thornwell resigned from the HOA the day after the federal investigators froze their construction accounts. The press called it a planned transition, but everyone knew better. She left behind 35 half-finished homes and exactly 0 friends. Her social media went dark. Her wine and cheese fundraisers disappeared, and her picture came down from the front of the Willowbrook Estates gates like she had never existed. Rick Thornwell didn't go quietly. He smirked his way through 2 months of hearings before the federal RICO charges landed. Wire fraud, environmental violations, zoning manipulation. It was all there on tape, in documents, and in testimonies. His fake mitigation reports. The construction loans backed by diverted water claims. The insurance fraud. He stood in front of a judge and tried to explain how it was all just paperwork errors. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in federal prison and stripped him of all future public office eligibility. Maggie faced $8.7 million in civil penalties. Her retirement savings evaporated like a puddle on a Texas road. She filed for bankruptcy while her husband went off to prison. They never touched another acre again. Willowbrook Estates sold off to pay legal fees. Most of the land was absorbed into a new township initiative, one dedicated to wildlife corridors and environmental restoration. The same creek Maggie tried to dam forever now runs freely down the center of a certified conservation zone. And Pop's land. It's worth more now than it ever was, not just in dollars, but in legacy, in pride, and in purpose. City planners rezoned it agricultural heritage, which means this place can never be developed. Ever protected rights, federal recognition, it's not for sale, not for grabs, not negotiable. You can't buy what belongs to the land. The dam's historic designation came through last month. The Army Corps added it to their engineering heritage list. And more importantly, the creek, Pop's Creek, as they've taken to calling it, is now a public example for federal training on watershed restoration. Kids come out on field trips now. Miguel and his wife run workshops. Mrs. Chen's garden is on the cover of a sustainable farming journal. She sells heirloom produce by the pound straight out of the same soil that was once left to die. And me. I still live in the old farmhouse, restored the porch, put solar panels on the roof, built a new barn out of reclaimed lumber from those unfinished cookie-cutter homes. Sarah moved back from California, said something about finding peace in places that fight for themselves. We run the land together now, rotational grazing, local crops, and an agritourism program that brings folks from all over the state to learn about water rights, land law, and how to fight back when the system gets lazy. Sometimes I sit on that porch at the end of the day with a glass of sweet tea and listen. Just listen. To the creek humming in the distance. To the wind nudging the tall grass. To the echoes of what this land remembers. Justice didn't come in a courtroom gavel slam. It flowed. It moved. It healed. Like water always does when you let it return to where it belongs. Amanda and I, we stayed in touch. She says the Willow Creek case has helped launch 6 other environmental lawsuits across the state. She even got appointed to the governor's Conservation Advisory Board last spring. Tony still calls, too, sends me updates from the EPA now and again, and veterans from all over the country have reached out after hearing what happened. They tell me they've got HOAs, dirty land grabs, corrupt boards. They just didn't know where to start. Now they do. We built a website, started a fund, named it after Pop, of course. The Morrison Water Defense Fund, protecting rural landowners from water theft, one watershed at a time. We're not activists. We're caretakers. We're engineers who remember the quiet power of a steady flow. And above all, we're neighbors. Every Sunday, I drive out to the cemetery with a jar of creek water, just like Pop used to. I pour it at the edge of his headstone, tip my hat, and say the same thing every time. She's flowing, Pop, free and clear. And she always will.